So right now we're going to go into a 1,000-foot view of what we do with digital strength training. Biggest premise is getting a 3-day total body program for you so we can hit all the big benchmarks as we go through our strength training. One of the big assets we try to push is mobility and training through a full range of motion. And one of the best things you can leverage there is CARs. CARs are being controlled articular rotations, and we have every single day including them. And this kind of gives us a better framework to seeing how we feel, how we're moving, making sure that we have the same prerequisite ranges of motion that we can utilize going into any training session. Some other things we find is maybe utilizing some of the pillars and corrective exercises, or said differently, core, and then some movements where we can rehearse and practice so we have a little higher level going into our training session. Now each session is going to be total body. So if you only get one, you're still going to cover a lot of your bases, but the goal is to get all three, obviously, to hit different angles, different vectors, to make sure we're getting that full and holistic training effect. Now the beautiful thing about total body training is it hits everything. Push, pull, so if it's done in a horizontal or vertical vector, or if we're doing a lower body or a lower body posterior chain, we still get the same systemic effect from training with cardiovascular, hormonally, but also too from making sure that we don't get any structural balance issues. So the big goal is making sure that we always adhere to total body, training full range of motion, and then the other one that we didn't really bring up so far would be progressive overload. If you've noticed, it's a 4-week training program. So each week we're looking to get a little bit more. So that means maybe starting off a little bit more practically or a little more conservatively, and then as you make your way through the 4 weeks, adding, so at the end you can maximize whatever exercises you're doing. So the big theme of this block is, one, hitting a combination of unilateral and bilateral exercises. And if you notice that it would be kind of consistent when we do a unilateral exercise, it's 5s on each side. So if you see in your trainer row it says 5, that'll mean actually 5 each side. So if I'm doing a dumbbell row, you do 5 with your right and then 5 with your left. Now if we're doing a bilateral exercise, that means 2 feet or 2 hands, it's gonna be 10 reps. So cumulatively, it'll be 10 reps. Now what that's gonna do is hit a little bit more volume. So you'll notice a little bit more of a cardiovascular effect than maybe you've gotten from the previous block or another block before. Now supersetting is actually gonna make it even more of a cardiovascular effect. And then we're gonna throw a corrective in there. And when you wanna look at that corrective is a way to not only build your technique, but to actually build in rest from the training that you're doing in your primary movements of A1, A2, or B1, B2. And that's to reinforce good rest, as well as get really good mechanics going back into your A1 or B1, so you have a little bit better platform to move a little bit better, be more recovered, and maximize what we're trying to get out of that is good weight, full range of motion, and then every week the intent to improve weight or progressively overload. So something you'll notice is on maybe the off days or days we don't have a structured workout off there is actual CARs. And there's 2 reasons why we want to do that. One, we should always do mobility or movement every single day. That reinforces good full range of motion of all your joints, as well as just seeing how you're feeling, and as well as accentuate recovery. Now the other big side of it is you notice there's a tracking component. We have readiness tracking, or said differently, wellness tracking, and we have RPE at the end. And the thing about that is it kind of gives us some sort of internal metric to assess how the program's going. So every day we see your wellness or readiness score. And that's a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being bad, 5 being good, of 5 different metrics. And you can calculate that out into an average, which you see in your trainer row, because if you put all 4s, it'll be an average of 4, or a total cumulative of 20. And that's kind of giving you a gauge on how the program's going, or just overall stress in your life. On top of that, at the end of your session, you actually see a difficulty in RPE, or an intensity scale. And that's on a 1 to 10 scale. 10 being I'm at the verge of passing out, 6 being very hard, 5 hard, 4 somewhat hard. And you kind of give a gauge on how intense the program was. And hopefully as you go through this, you'll start seeing the interaction between your readiness and your RPE and the impact of that training program. So if your readiness is low, typically your RPE or your intensity is going to be high. And we want to track that as we go through and start making mental notes, or actually physical notes, of seeing how that program's impacting, as well as the convergence of that training program, as well as your everyday normal life, whether you have a lot of stress at work or whether you have a lot of stress in your personal life. It's going to have an impact, and we want to acknowledge that and making sure that we're tracking that in some mechanism. And then finally, actually I give you minutes of actual training session. That time, your RPE or your intensity, you can start creating a metric, and you can start getting some sort of known load as you go through that 4-week progression. And you can start tracking that as well as seeing the overall intensity of another unit to kind of see where you're going. And the overall impact over the course of 4 weeks is the intensity should start gradually going up as we're going up in weight and we're making our way towards progressing towards maximizing that training block. And then we go into a new training block, and it's almost like starting from scratch, learn the movements, lower intensity. Hopefully that wellness or readiness score is a little bit higher, so we start adapting and recovering, and we can start building back up that intensity and start creating adaptation the old-fashioned way through good old-fashioned hard work.